Welcome, everyone. I'm Lauren Hawkins. Thanks for tuning in with us to Spirituality Adventures. We are so glad you're here, and we're very excited about the content we get to share with you through our blogs and podcasts. Spirituality Adventures is made possible by your support. One way you can support us is by liking, following, subscribing, or sharing any of these podcasts or blogs that you like. Another way you can support us is by going to our website, www.spiritualityadventures.com. There you can click the support tab and you can sign up for a monthly subscription or a one-time gift. We appreciate all your support. Now here's Fred.
Welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality. And we've been talking about creativity and spirituality over the last several weeks together. And we've been interviewing a lot of songwriters, musicians, and today we are so excited to have Jon Terrey with us. Thanks for coming, Jon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Jon is a local musician here in Kansas City, and he is a friend of Matt Cox, who is our videographer with Harbor Media Productions. And so Matt made an introduction, and I've been listening to Jon Terrey's music now for a week, and it's been fun to hear. And he has a fascinating career. So why don't you give us just a little intro about, where you grew up and some of your family history and background?
I kind of grew up as my dad was a music pastor for most of my life. So we kind of moved around a fair amount, but right around like the middle of 5th grade, we settled in Kansas City. So I kind of consider this home, but grew up in Lee Summit area. Always was in a musical family for sure. So I think it's funny because my parents kind of had I was the last of 4 kids. So I think when they got to me, like all 3 of my sisters had like started an instrument and quit. So they were apprehensive about me trying to start an instrument, but I picked up an acoustic guitar that my sister had. I don't know where it came from, but I started playing that quite a bit. I think they saw that I had interest in that. And after about a year of bugging my parents, they finally gave me an electric guitar for my birthday. I think I was 14. And I've been playing guitar ever since. I think maybe like 6 months later is when I started my own band. I was kind of like, well, I have an electric guitar now. Time to start a band. Not thinking anything beyond that, really.
Oh, that's great. What were you listening to at the time when you were 14? What were your influences at that moment?
I think I grew up as a Christian kid, so there was a bit of my musical history is a bit sheltered, but there were a lot of cool alternative Christian bands at the time. So Newsboys had just put out Take Me to Your Leader, which was kind of alternative. And then DC Talk had just put out Jesus Freak. Yeah. So those were 2 big records for me. And then a band called Bleach had put out a record that I really liked. They were kind of grungy alternative.
Yeah. I remember
and then
Bleach.
A friend of mine made me a cassette of a bunch of secular bands. So I had Soundgarden, Nirvana, Butthole Surfers. I want to say there's probably a couple other bands on there that I'm forgetting, but just that whole section of Seattle grunge and alternative bands that were out at the time. And that really kind of changed my whole world as far as what was out there for music. And I really gravitated towards that early grunge alternative music.
Interesting.
Because it felt like any regular guy could play it. And I really liked that aesthetic rather than these pompous, artists that, were larger than life and no one could touch. Never really didn't feel like me. But then when the grunge scene kind of came about, I felt like, well, these guys are just like me. Mm-hmm. So there's something I can relate to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good music. I remember I went and saw DC Talk at Kemper Arena in Kansas City when they did their Jesus Freak tour.
Wow.
And that honestly was an amazing concert.
Yeah.
Gosh, they were talented. I was in a bookstore in a suburb outside of Nashville one year, and my ex-wife was a huge DC Talk fan. And you know how they had the big magazine section in Barnes and Nobles? We were in a Barnes and Noble, and she goes, "I think that's Kevin Smith over there." He was reading the magazine, you know.
Yeah.
And one of the DC Talk guys, and I said, "Well, go talk to him." And she goes, "No, you know."
Yeah.
So I said, "Well, I will." And so I just walked right up to him and said, "Hey, are you Kevin Smith?" And he's like, "Yeah, you know." And I was a pastor at the time, and you know, it's just like we ended up talking like 30 minutes, just super down to earth guy. It was kind of fun.
Nice.
But yeah, so you're kind of into the grunge scene and all that. I know you're really well known in the Christian metal community and the metal community. So when did you get into metal? What were your early metal influences?
So I played in like kind of a grungy, like alternative band through high school. And then kind of like my junior year is when I kind of discovered like bands like Zao and Norma Jean. They were Ludacris first, but became Norma Jean. Kind of discovered that. And then friends that I started hanging out with were all interested in that same style. And so we decided to form a band that was that style, called Entropy. It was the first like heavy band I was in. And that lasted for probably about a year and a half. And that kind of morphed into a band called the James Dean Trio. And that was the first band that I did like small tours with. And we felt pretty serious about it for quite a while. As serious as we weren't very serious about it. We didn't take much seriously, but
Were you still in high school?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was like that was right at the end of high school into like the first 2 years out of high school. Some of us went to college, some of us didn't. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do at that point, so I was just working. We would play with bands around town. We have good friends of ours who are in a band called Flattery Leads to Ruins. And Jake Ryan and Dan Eaton were in that band. And Jake Ryan went on to play with the Chariot. And so that's how that connection was made. So I'd say after James Dean Trio, I decided to go to college up in St. Paul, Minnesota for recording technology. So I was there for about a year and a half. And then after that time, I went back home and was just kind of playing with a few bands in town. And about a year later is when Jake called me, just kind of out of the blue. And he's like, "Hey, man, what are you up to?" I was like, "Oh, just delivering pizzas and playing some music." He's like, "Oh, you still playing guitar? Cool. Well, I got to go. I'll talk to you later." And I was just like, man, that's a weird phone call to get out of the blue. And I knew at that point that he had been playing in the Chariot. So the wheels started turning of like, this might be something. So I think he ended up calling me back like a week later or something. And he's like, "Yeah, our guitar player and our bass player are leaving and we're kind of looking around for people. I'll be home in like 2 weeks if you want to like meet up and hang out." So that was kind of like the point where I was like, okay, like I don't like going into any band or any situation unprepared. So I went to Best Buy and I hadn't really listened to the Chariot at all. I bought their first record at Best Buy, brought it home and listened to it. And I was like, man, this sounds terrible. I don't know what's going on here. So I went back to Best Buy and bought their newest EP, which was recorded a little bit better so I could at least hear what was going on. And so I was like, well, I can start with this. So I started learning all those songs within that 2-week period before meeting up with Jake.
Oh, wow.
So by the time I met up, he was like, "Hey, have you heard any of our songs?" I was like, "Yeah, I've been working on like the EP." And he's like, "Oh, cool. That's pretty much what we play." I was like, okay, good. So within the next week, I think we had gotten together just to jam and see if it would work. And it felt pretty good. Obviously it's weird when you go into a situation and it's just like guitar and drums and I don't know what these songs are supposed to feel like. I'm just playing what I hear on a record, but it felt pretty good already at that point. And that kind of just snowballed into our time with the Chariot.
Yeah. So
Fast and Furious.
I know. I want to talk about this because this is fascinating. So I've listened to a lot of Chariot songs now, and it's just fascinating to me because it wasn't what I was listening to, when you were playing it. I wasn't, but I did have some connection because you guys were on with Tooth and Nail.
Yeah.
And I would always get the Tooth and Nail compilations that would come out like in the Christian bookstore. And
Me too.
I think it was actually maybe a VHS in the early days. Was it, or was it a DVD? Or
they would do both. They do like a CD, and then they would also do like DVD and VHS of like all the videos.
Yes, right. Of the music videos. And I remember that. So that was kind of one of my early learning all these Christian metal bands, right? So that would definitely be the genre that you were in, would be Christian metal band. Would that be the Chariot?
We always got lumped into metal, but we never really felt very metal. We were like, it's hard to explain, but there's just a fine line between like early punk music and metal to me. Like punk is just like kind of became metal for some bands. Metal is just like faster punk, but then there's like metal and hardcore, which hardcore is even closer to punk, I would say. So there's all these little subgenres, but we didn't feel like a metal band, like a Metallica or like Cannibal Corpse or something like that, which is like real heavy. We were more on like the punk rock side of like, we can kind of play our instruments pretty good, but we're not like super technical, and we're not going to try to be. It's like, we're going to have like high energy shows, but we may not play every note specifically perfectly. Like it was more about the like feeling and the energy of a show rather than like trying to be perfect with every note of every song. Yeah.
So one of the things that fascinates me, and I'm a non-musician, and I've been a fan of musicians my whole life.
Yeah.
Right. So, but like so many of the songs, it's like click, 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 and then bam.
Yeah.
It's just like the third click, and then it's just like vocals are screaming, and all the guitars are screaming, and the drums are screaming. Everything just goes click, 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 and then wham! It's just like this wall of sound comes at you. I find that it's just fascinating to me. It's not like you don't like ease into anything hardly,
I think a lot of the Chariot was just about like the energy of what music could be, rather than like, we're going to play every note like perfectly and standing still. It's like, how much force can you put into like playing your guitar in like this one section? And like, what could you do like to envelop the crowd? Like, could you just run and jump out into the crowd and keep playing? Like, it was like, what could you do to make it crazier and more intense and fun, really?
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys too, when you jumped on with the Chariot in 2005, is that right?
It's 5 or 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys were touring like crazy already, right?
Yeah. I mean, from me talking to Jake in that first meeting, I would say Josh came to Kansas City, the vocalist. And we, like, as soon as he got there, we started practicing. And we basically would practice the set, which was like 6 or 7 songs. Chariot sets were always pretty short, just because he can't put out that much energy for all that long, but that's another story. So we would practice for about a week, and then we started writing for a record. And that was probably like, so we would kind of switch back and forth, play the set, try to write, just pretty typical, like creative energy in that sense. And within 2 weeks, we went to go play a festival, and then we had about a week to hone in our set a little bit more. And then we were on like a huge tour for that summer. So within like 3 weeks of getting together and playing songs, we were out on the road. And that we would play over 200 shows a year, if not more.
Was that all in America?
No, a couple tours in Europe.
Really?
Yeah.
What countries in Europe?
All over. My first tour was 6 weeks, and we went almost everywhere but Spain. So like a lot of the Central European. So like we did UK, France, Germany, Belgium, and Switzerland. I don't know. It gets fuzzy because that was a long time ago, but I've since done a lot of tours in Europe. So I've played a lot of different countries.
On your solo stuff or with Listener or both?
Mostly with Listener, but with the Chariot, we did a couple European tours as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So when the Chariot toured, so you were a Christian band. Is that right? Is that okay to say that?
Yeah, that's okay to say that. I think that's always like, it's a point where people will stop and they want to like explain it. And I think that makes sense. I think we were Christians in a band because I think a band being Christian is kind of a strange thing. Yeah. It's kind of like the VeggieTales were Christian vegetables. Like vegetables are just vegetables, you know? I
completely understand. Yeah.
That's kind of why we thought that phrasing was strange.
The Christian culture wants everything to be Christian.
Right?
Christian yoga, Christian this, Christian, you know.
And that a lot of times where the question would come from would be from the Christian culture.
Yeah.
Like everybody else didn't care.
Yeah.
As much.
So, but part of me asking that is connected. So when you toured, were you doing mostly bars? Were you doing clubs? Were you doing churches? Was it a mixture of stuff? Like what venues were you playing in?
Early on with the Chariot, we would play almost anywhere. I would say most churches aren't as receptive to like that style of music. And because there's the whole background of like, most of those bands are going to play in clubs and bars. So like churches are like, we don't want a band that plays like bars. Like we want a good Christian band. And then we would play like churches and they would be upset that we wouldn't like have an altar call. Like this old like thought of like how ministry could be, or like, you know, who we were as Christians at the time.
So you had an awkward relationship with the church. Is that a good way to say
I'd
it?
Say so.
Uh-huh.
And at the time, and I think even still, like, I don't really consider myself a Christian anymore, but I still have a faith that's based in my past, which is definitely Christianity. At the time, it felt more real and more of a ministry to talk to people outside of a church, because there wasn't this like agenda in place. It was like, I'm going to meet you where you are and we're just going to have a conversation about what's going on. Mm-hmm. And that to me felt more like edifying to both of us really than to try and like go to a church and we're going to shove it down your throat and you're going to like be changed forever from this one day forward. Mm-hmm. That didn't feel real to any of us. So
one heavy metal concert changes your life forever. Right. Maybe though, you never know.
Yeah. I mean,
you never know.
I'm open to that.
But it might have just been the music. You never know. Anyway, that's funny.
I mean, I still talk to people today. They're like, your music changed my life. And that's great. And I'm glad.
So I think my feeling is that music, when I listen to music, it's a spiritual experience for me. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter where the music is coming from. It can be Death Cab for Cutie coming from a guy who says he's an atheist, and I find their music incredibly spiritual.
Yeah.
And it could be Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam, who I think probably says he's an agnostic. And I find he's like the most spiritual agnostic I've ever known. You know,
Sure.
His music so to me, music is spiritual and it moves people at a heart level.
Yeah.
And it's transcendent.
Yeah.
It connect, you're in a concert and everybody's together move. It's like being at a Chiefs game and everybody's going, go Chiefs. It's like being in everybody connects. There's a connection that goes on.
For sure.
I think spiritual and transcendent at concerts. It could be a country concert. It could be, whatever.
I agree completely.
Yeah. So good stuff. So you're in these different venues and you come at people with this wall of music. You're doing 7 songs, and the size of your venues, did it vary from 50 people to what were some of the larger venues you might have done? Like, what's the largest crowd you played in front of? I'm curious.
Me personally?
Yeah.
Or with the Chariot?
Either way.
Man, we've played... Every now and then you'll play like a big festival and you might play for, I don't know numbers, but maybe up to like 30,000 people.
Gee.
But that's like once a year, maybe, if you're lucky.
Yeah. Did you ever do Cornerstone?
Yeah.
That's an old.
So we played main stage at Cornerstone, and I think the estimates for like that on a regular basis were around 10,000 people.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. Before... The second show I played with the Chariot was main stage at Cornerstone.
Wow.
And I'm just like, what am I doing here?
Wow. For those that are listening, Cornerstone was put together by a band called Res Band.
Yeah.
Who actually were kind of some hippies that started following Jesus and built a little community in Chicago.
Yeah.
That lived together and kind of did things in kind of like First Acts 2 church kind of stuff. But then they did this kind of hardcore band, metal. It wasn't really metal, but it was just hard rock band.
It was, definitely a kind of like the Chariot of its day. Not that we're like Res Band, but a band that wasn't in the norm for its time, still proclaiming to be Christians. Yeah.
So then they put together this festival called Cornerstone, and it's gone for decades, hadn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it ended probably about 10 years ago, but a lot of festivals had attendance drop off, but Cornerstone was like every year just paying back the previous year. And finally a lot of the companies were like, we can't keep letting you take on this debt every year. So that kind of ended.
It was almost like a Christian version of Woodstock or something like that. That's kind of what I thought.
Yeah, that's real. I went almost 10 years in a row. I would go for 15, 20 years. I think I missed 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So like, that was like, I could go to Cornerstone and be like, this is a faith I could get behind, because there was every culture you could imagine and everybody had different ideas.
Yeah.
And it all felt welcome there.
Yeah. Even
the people I knew who were like helping to run Cornerstone, I could really like relate to in a lot of ways.
Very cool. Well, that's fun stuff. So, and you're with the label Tooth and Nail, and was there anything was that a positive thing working with them, or did it turn? Was it just like I hear so many crazy, usually negative stories about working with labels and stuff like that, but.
I think there's kind of both with that, because there was a guy named Chad Johnson who worked there, who his label kind of got absorbed into Tooth and Nail. He was part of Take Hold Records, and Chad was amazing. And I felt like he really like genuinely cared about his bands and tried his best to do what he could for you and went to bat for you with the label. But in the same vein, like, I think knowing what I know now, like as a label, they don't really consider themselves Christian, but they have a lot of, the founder is a Christian and a lot of Christian bands. They have some of the worst deals of any secular label even, or like treatment that I hear constantly from people that have been a part of that label.
Okay.
So like there's both sides. Like you have good people, there's always good and bad people in some scenarios. And Chad was amazing and continues to be to this day. But like, I mean, we've sold, I don't know how many records at this point, but Chariot sold maybe over 100,000 records or something. And like, I don't think any of us see any money on a regular basis. I get like a 30-cent check a year or something. So,
wow.
I mean, I feel like that's stealing in a way.
Yeah. Kind of like Apple Music.
Yeah. It's just like streaming. For sure.
Oh, man. Yeah. Boy, the digital age sure. Everybody's still trying to figure out how to make money in this digital world, aren't they? Crazy. Well, tell me, so, you have this wall of music, you're engaging the crowd. It's like a complete immersion into sound, and you guys were radical in your stage performances.
Yeah.
Matt showed me your video from Perth.
Okay. Yeah. Describe
that because it's like an 11-minute. So you can do the Chariot Perth. For those who are listening, Perth. Was this in Australia?
Yeah, I wasn't in the band, but I've heard. But I've heard about it.
Okay,
and I can share a little bit about it. From what I understand, they played this venue, and the whole time the venue was kind of apprehensive about them even being there. And Stevis was the guitar player, ran over to where I don't know the whole scenario, but there was a table and a bowl of fruit on the table. And in Chariot fashion, he just ran up and kicked the bowl of fruit off the table. And that, the venue was like, that's it. We're shutting you down. You're not going to keep playing. So there's thousands of people maybe in this venue. And they just cut the power. They're like, you're done. You kicked the bowl of fruit over. For whatever reason that matters. But so I guess the whole venue filtered out. And some guy's like, you can come play at my house. So that everybody just drives to this guy's house. They set up and just play at his house, and whoever wanted to go could go.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Probably shook the neighborhood up, didn't it?
Yeah.
I bet.
I think Wolf ended up playing on the roof at one point of the house.
I saw it.
Yeah.
It was, reminded me of Almost Famous,
Yeah.
I'm a golden guy.
I was usually the guy in the Chariot that was hanging back with the drummer and trying to give some semblance of music. So I would have my moments of I don't know how to explain it, but I would just all of a sudden feel like I wanted to get into it, and I'd have my little spurts. But a lot of the times I was just hanging back trying to give some foundation so where the other two guys could just, if they wanted to throw their bass, throw their guitar, and run out in the crowd, they could, and there would still be some music going on.
Yeah.
So that was my contribution.
It's the band is a mosh pit.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I was thinking. It's
that's
and
very
then
true.
Everybody else can kind of jump in with them,
Josh would always say this stage is your stage. And people took that literally, and that was totally fine. So there are some shows where you just end up with 50, 60 people on stage, and it's just what's happening? But that was part of the fun. It wasn't supposed to just be about us. It was we're all experiencing this moment together.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. So, at some point, and you already touched on this a little bit, but and I want to get to some of your solo projects and your work with Listener.
Yeah.
And even just a little plug about your vegan cart.
Sure.
But I was thinking at some point maybe at the tail end of your experience with the Chariot, you had I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but you had a bit of a falling out with the church. Is that a way to say it, or not? Maybe not with any individual church.
Yeah,
but
not any individual church.
But you're just how would you describe sort of your relationship to the church? And you touched on your kind of your own spirituality right now. If you want to expand on that a little bit, just whatever you would be comfortable with.
I think a lot of things were happening for me I was in my mid-20s. A lot of things were changing in my life. I was starting to ask big questions about my faith, and I hadn't being in a band. You have this other version of church was just us in the band, and if we wanted to get together and talk about it, we did, but it didn't happen all that often. We still prayed a lot together as a band, and that felt good. But I I can only speak for myself, but I was getting to a point where it's just hard being in a band, and that wears you down physically. And you, contrary to popular belief, you don't make a lot of money being in a band. I probably made my first year like $6,000, but like all those things factor into just like it being a strain and wanting to try to do something different and change up my life. And I had gotten engaged at that point. So I would say getting engaged, getting married, that kind of like started the twist of Christianity for me and what it meant, and kind of seeking out different things. I started going to a Methodist church for a while, and that was a very different approach to Christianity than I had experienced before. I grew up Southern Baptist, so I think there's a lot of like taboos around a lot of different subjects. One of those being alcohol. And going to the Methodist church, it was like, whoa, we can even drink here in the church. It's like, oh, maybe not everything's terrible and bad for you. And like, I still believe that like everything in moderation is like a very biblical thing that I think is applicable to almost everything and anyone. And I still try and live by that.
Yeah.
I don't really drink anymore, which is funny.
I always have problems with the moderation part.
Yeah. Sometimes you're better off just not at all.
Yeah. Crazy.
So I think it's trying to like sum up that 5 years. My marriage didn't last. And I think part of that was we were trying to uphold these Christian values that we weren't really believing in our heart of hearts. And it wasn't working for us. And I think within that, we both felt, talking about it, we both felt like we don't belong together, even if we, that's the other part of like the Christian faith, like really doesn't want you to ever get divorced for any reason. And that felt worse to me, like staying together for not really a good reason, when it would feel so much better if we had our freedom and could just be what we felt like was true to ourselves. So in that process, also kind of going through my faith process, I was like, what I believe doesn't have to be what everybody else is trying to tell me. It can be like what I feel in my heart and what feels real to me. And so I think for a while, I think a lot of the toxic part of the Christianity I just needed to get away from. Mm. That just meant me not really going to church for a while and just seeking out, what is God? What is this creation thing? And what does it mean? Mm. And I wouldn't say that I've come back to the point where I want to be in church, but I went from being very angry and bitter at church to kind of coming around to like being open to a lot of like knowing that people are fallible and we all are trying to just figure it out, and that you can have a faith. You don't have to completely get rid of it. So like being atheist wasn't the answer for me. I still think, and a part of that is being a musician, I feel there's a moment with playing with individuals where there's a spiritual thing that happens and you feel connected and it's like flowing through you musically. And that's the same thing that I've experienced at church at sometimes. And I think they're all connected. And it took me realizing like maybe the music part is your spirituality, and it does the thing you're trying to force yourself into at a church isn't the right thing. And so the more I kind of focused on that and was touring a lot with Listener, kind of to shorten the story, that felt so much better and more real in like a spiritual practice, really, and finding, what a God or a creator is for me.
That's good. You mentioned as well, like just the connection with people when you're like being real. So the community component where two people, like you mentioned, just, sitting down and literally just having a conversation. Yeah. And your stories, you connect over that. I think that connection with yourself, connection with others, and connection with something greater you is what I have described with spirituality adventures is kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When I think about it. And so that happens and certainly happens with music. For me, that's a huge part of my spirituality. And I don't even play anything and I can't sing on tune very well.
Yeah.
But I listen to music and I'll listen and re-listen and, I can memorize lyrics and
something new can come out each time.
Every time.
Yeah. I think that's spirituality for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fascinating to me. I studied the Hebrew Bible and worked on a PhD in the Hebrew Bible. And the opening 2 chapters are the creation story. And those are written in what we might call poetic prose. So it's not quite poetry, but it's not just strictly like prose or and it's certainly not narrative history. It's a poetic, rhythmic. It's almost like the opening chapters is a song.
Yeah.
That's being sung, creativity. So I think about, like creativity and spirituality. And to me, those flow from the same space. All of creation vibrates with sound.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And even this ancient creation story starts out with melody and rhythms, and it's like spoken poetry.
Yeah.
Which maybe gets us to another big part of your story is you ended your career with the Chariot, but then you picked up with solo projects and with a band here in Kansas City called The Listener.
Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about your solo work and your work with The Listener.
Sure. And
explain it, because some of the audience that's listening won't be in tune with the indie world and won't know sort of how big a band Listener is and some of your solo stuff as well.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of work, my friend. That's great.
I have to work. I think part of me being honest with my creative side is like, I have to do the work. That's just part of me. Like, no matter how hard it may be, I am an artist and I have to be creative. Starting with Listener just kind of happened because, my good friends needed a guitar player, which I think all good things kind of happen that way. And everything in life was lining up to where I was open and available to do that. So about 6 years ago, I started playing guitar with them and probably did even more touring than the Chariot within the last 5 years. I don't know exactly how much, but when I first started dating my now fiancé, that first year I was only home like 3 months, which is very hard, but I don't know where I was going with that. But that kind of starting Listener also encouraged me to start solo project, just because, as my friend Derek Sinetti would say, he's the homeless gospel choir, said therapy's too expensive, so I just write music, and that feels pretty spot on with me as well. So my first foray into like solo music was just dealing with coming out of a divorce and my faith, and all of that is put into like my records, and just kind of, it's really just me talking about it in music and trying to work through it.
Yeah. So tell us about some of your solo stuff then.
It was really just out of necessity. I didn't have a project or a band at the time and really just wanted to be creative. So I just started putting stuff down, and it was very deliberate that I didn't want to do something like big and heavy like the Chariot. I just wanted to like strip down to play a lot of the music that I really like to listen to, which is more mellow and laid back. So I just started writing and keep writing. It's just kind of this, when I don't have anything else to work on, it's something that I work on. It's part of my creative process.
So you've done different titles or different bands for your solo albums. How do you
kind of? I try to put it all under Jon Terrey.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've done
like Stolen Nations.
That's a different project.
Okay. So that's not, you don't consider that a solo project then?
I mean, it kind of is. Chris Rochelle, who plays in the Listener, has joined me for that project because I can't do drums. So I always default to somebody who can play drums well.
Okay.
That was kind of a one-off, and there's more of that in the works, but it's just kind of finding time when, maybe this summer.
And it's a bit, leans more toward heavy.
I would say it's kind of the midway of like the Chariot stuff I did and like my solo stuff, because it's feels like a rock and roll band to me.
Okay.
And sometimes it's just a matter of like, I'll start a project to push myself in a direction. It's like, can I play guitar and sing? Okay, let's write some songs and try it. And yeah, I can do that.
So Solitaire is one of your solo records, and it has an alt country feel to it. Beautiful stuff.
Thank you.
That's kind of more of the stuff I would like gravitate toward, listen to, and
that's a lot of what I listen to. Bands that I really like.
Yeah.
Kind of Americana, that vein.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah.
I love that. Then just tell the audience a little bit about Listener.
Yeah. So Listener's, a guy named Dan Smith started the project he was a rap artist early on, like probably around 20 years now ago. And would do a bunch of different projects kind of within his rap name of The Listener. And that kind of, he got to a point where like lyrically a lot of that genre just didn't really feel real to him. Like he wasn't like rap and hip hop lyrics didn't really like connect with him. So he's like, I really like a lot of rock and indie music. So he kind of transitioned Listener from more of like a rap project into more of a just spoken word with some tracks and some instrumentation. And that was about 10 years ago. And that's kind of morphed into more of a full band at this point. But Listeners put out 6 or 7 records at this point.
Yeah. 2002, I think, till now.
Yeah. I think the first, like the biggest record and the biggest switch, and for those who don't know, we kind of call it talk music because there's a lot of spoken word over music. It's not just like melodic words. It's just like speak a lot, kind of in the vein of Me Without You, if anybody knows that band. So Wooden Heart, I would say, is the most popular record and the record that a lot of people kind of gravitated towards. And that just turned 10 years old last year.
Okay.
And that, I would say, from Wooden Heart on is kind of pretty much what the band is today. There is some big shifts and change musically, but sound-wise, that's very much what it is today.
Yeah. I listened several times to the Being Empty, Being Filled.
Yeah.
And, really enjoyed it.
It's a great record.
Yeah. Excellent.
Dan and Chris wrote most of that themselves. It was kind of a transition period where they had a lot of that already written, so it made sense for them to just go ahead and record it themselves. But yeah, it's fantastic.
So you've toured all over the America and Europe with Listener.
All over the world. Yeah.
And are you guys, what kind of venues are you guys doing when you tour all over?
A little bit of everything. We try to stick to venues these days just because early on, Listener did a lot of DIY stuff. And the only issue with that is quality of sound. When you get to a band level, if you don't have quality sound, like you're not going to hear any lyrics. And Listener's so heavy on lyrics that we'd like to have good sound where we can. And we tend to, especially in Europe, they treat us really well. We tend to play pretty decent sized venues there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, cool. By the way, I meant to ask you this when we were talking about Chariot, just to jump back for a second.
Yeah.
But on one of the Chariot albums, it was interesting to me is so that you have this heavy metal, but then occasionally you throw in these little like old style songs or hymns or something. And one of them at the end of your fiancé album, you had this old hymn. I'd never heard of it. It's called The Trumpet.
Yeah.
And it's like, where was that recorded? And
so that
has a fascinating hymn.
Yeah. It's a fascinating story too. There was a friend of Matt Goldman, was a producer who's done several of the Chariot records. A friend of his is also an engineer and created a documentary about shape note singing, which comes out of this Quaker tradition.
I was wondering, I was thinking if it was Amish or Quaker or what. I knew it had to be an older style. Yeah. Anyway.
We really related to kind of the story of it, and we thought the song was just, a lot of that documentary is so powerful, but that tradition of Quaker, what they do, I don't know if it's all Quaker churches, but they point all the pews to the center of the room. And so they'll get together to do these singings. There might be a different word for it, but anyone's invited, anybody in the community, anybody else that wants to come and sing, and everybody sits in the pews, but they're all facing the center. And then one by one, there's no leadership. Whoever wants to can get up and lead whatever song they choose. And one of the kind of unspoken rules is for shape note singing is sing as loud as you can so that you can't hear your neighbor. So everybody's singing almost as loud as they can. And that's, I think, why it's so powerful.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I've never experienced that. So where was that recorded? Because you're recording a real meeting.
I can't think of his name.
Somebody singing,
I can find out.
The trumpet. Okay. I was just curious.
Matt Goldman's friend, who's an engineer, was going to a bunch of these gatherings and recording them live.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. And a lot of those songs are, what's the word? They're free for anyone.
I would love to find one of those and go to it just to experience it once.
Me too.
That's really interesting. We'll have to do that.
Yeah.
That'll be a date. All right.
Sounds good.
All right. And then one other, you and your fiance do a vegan hot dog cart, which I just thought, oh, that's cool. And so tell us about that and how that might show up around the city. And
it's called Deadbeat Eats. And beet as in the vegetable, just because it's a funny play on words. It was just an idea that Kat had a couple of years ago. We had been doing vegan taco pop-ups, and then kind of when COVID started to emerge, we couldn't do pop-ups in a bar like we were normally doing. So she had this idea to get a hot dog cart, something we could do out in the open. It was a little safer. And we just said, well, let's try it. It couldn't hurt to try. And we've just been very successful with it. And it's just kind of a niche little fun thing for vegan or not, anybody in the community who wants to try something a little different, but still in a vein of a food that you know so well. So we'll do like a special, once every couple weeks, 2 weeks. But we tend to sell out almost every week. And it's just a lot of fun.
So how do people find out where you're going to be?
It's all been through social media so far. So Instagram and Facebook, and then that community has just grown and people continue to follow and keep up with where we're going to be.
So where's your next location?
Thursday, we will be at, I'm going to mess it up. KC Wineworks in the Crossroads. We'll be popping up there.
Nice.
For about 3 or 4 hours. I think starting at 6 to 9, I believe.
And if they have cookies, get them.
Yeah, cookies are really good too.
All right, Matt Cox, plugging the cookies.
Yeah, got to get the cookies.
I want to try a hot dog, a vegan hot dog. Yeah. All right. Well, man, let's. I want to kind of close with you doing one of your songs.
Sure.
So give us a little setup for the song you're going to do.
Sure. The song's called Longest Day. And I think it's a good nutshell of me kind of coming to terms with religion. And It's kind of a commentary on a lot of the stories I feel like I heard growing up about whether they're true or not, about kind of what the Bible says about, what will happen and, where we're going to be and that kind of thing. What happens when you die, kind of.
And which album is this on?
This is on Solitaire.
Solitaire,
yeah.
Which is an alt country album, and beautiful, really well done. I really love it.
Thank you.
And the name of the song one more time?
Longest Day.
Longest Day. All right. Excellent. All right. This is Jon Terrey, his solo album Solitaire, and this is his song Longest Day. This is an alt country album. Beautiful album.
In the valley of the shadow, you can light your cigarette, and the soft warm glow will lead you back home. And you can fear no evil, 'cause you know that he's with you. But the line to see St. Peter stretches on and on and on. This will be your longest day. This will be your longest day. Floating in midair, just above the clouds, up among the faceless, swimming through the crowd. One by one, verdicts handed down. Perfect brand new body, or a trip back underground. What kind of maker haunts its creation? What a gracious heavenly host, like a belief, who's got you pinned to a wall. This is love. Don't you recall? This is the day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice. I will be glad in it, 'cause I don't have a choice.
Yay.
Thanks.
Good job. Oh, that had some great images in it. You pull out these little passages from scripture and then kind of mash them up into life experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. I love that.
Thanks.
Very cool. Well, thanks, Jon, for joining us at Spirituality Adventures. Everybody,
Thanks.
you can tune in. What's your website? And
JonTerrey.com.
Okay.
JonTerrey.
Yeah. JonTerrey.com.
Yep.
And then all of your stuff is on Apple and Spotify, all the different music channels.
Everywhere you could want. Yep.
So thanks for joining us, and thanks everybody
Thanks for having me.
You bet.
It was fun.
All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks again for tuning in. Remember to visit our support page at www.spiritualityadventures.com. If you like what you heard, be sure to share it and leave a comment. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Harvey Media Production.